Hi, my name is Larry Walters. This video is prepared as part of the Leveraging Land-Based Finance for Local Governments training program prepared by UN Habitat and the Global Land Tool Network. In this video, we'll be talking about the sale of development rights. We'll cover both the key points of selling development rights. We'll also discuss a couple of cases so that you are prepared for your small group and large group discussions. The objectives are pretty straightforward. We want to understand the requirements of and the core principles underlying the sale of development rights. Key concept here is that land ownership in and of itself does not automatically include the unlimited right to develop that land. There are any number of ways that we restrict land development. Some of it may be zoning in terms of what kinds of land use is appropriate in one location versus another. Maybe height restrictions, a variety of ways. When we're selling development rights, what we're saying is that some of those permissions to develop land in particular ways are optional. If the developer or the landowner chooses to develop their land in that way, there's a fee associated with it. So let's be clear on some definitions. What we're talking about is payment in exchange for permission to develop or to redevelop land at either a higher density or with a change in land use. These rights can be either sold by the government at auction or at a fixed price, and the rights may or may not be transferable to other locations or resellable. They're collected once by the government, and they're paid for by the purchaser of the development right. The purpose for selling development rights is generally for one of two reasons. We either want to generate revenue needed for infrastructure investments in a particular area, or we want to regulate and guide private investment and related infrastructure and services. What are the minimum requirements? First of all, there needs to be an appropriate enabling legal framework. There has to be effective control of existing development rights. If you can't enforce building restrictions, there's no point in trying to sell additional building rights. Third, there has to be demand for additional development rights. Making additional development rights for sale in areas where there is no demand for additional development serves little purpose. You have to have the administrative and planning capacity to determine the acceptable amount of additional development. That often means that you have the engineering studies looking at the infrastructure and the long-range planning to assess what the traffic impacts will be, what the load on the water system, the sewer system, the electrical system. All of those factors have to be weighed in determining which and where the development rights should be made available. You have to have the capacity to manage the process of selling additional development rights. Depending on the mechanism that you use and the way you design that sale process, that may require the development of a whole new infrastructure for managing those sales. Finally, you need to have the capacity to monitor the use and the resale of rights sold. Are the rights, in fact, going into the places and to the people that you want them to go to? The systems for selling development rights vary in complexity, but they all have in common the notion that you're increasing the ratio of the built floor space to the land area. The rights can be acquired from one location and may be transferred to another location in some circumstances. And it may be that the sale of rights is in an open auction or maybe at a fixed rate. Okay? There must be a market demand for additional development in the designated area. And the legal framework has to allow for the sale of those development rights. The governing authority must have the technical and the administrative capacity to effectively initiate, monitor, and regulate both the initial sale, any subsequent resale of the rights, and the ultimate development. Let me give you an example. Curitiba in Paraná, Brazil, has been selling development rights since 1991. Their approach is to adjust the floor area ratio. The master plan specifies that along transit corridors, which have been identified by the city in the master plan, it is possible to increase the density by increasing the built area to the land area. The developers have the right to build to that minimum level Any increase beyond that has to be purchased at a fixed price set by the city. In this case, what we're talking about, a floor area ratio. Again, that's the built floor area divided by the land area. In Curitiba, the program has been used extensively to promote transit-oriented development, to fund social housing, even for historic preservation. The way it works with historic preservation is they identify the areas that they want to preserve, they sell those additional development rights, but they have to be transferred to a different location. It raises about $17.5 million per year for affordable housing in Curitiba. It's been a program that they have found to be successful over time. What do you have to do to make it work? It requires a strong administrative capacity, enforceable building restrictions, and demand for higher densities. The other issue that you have to worry about, though, is that the poor and the vulnerable populations may be pushed out unless care is taken to protect their interests. In cities where you have an undeveloped or an older, lower density community, part of the community, and you sell the additional development rights, the people that are there now may not be able to afford to buy those rights, and they may get pushed out. And so you have to think about how that's going to work, what the dynamics are for those populations, and protect them as well. The summary, there has to be demand. There has to be an appropriate legal framework. There has to be the administrative capacity to make it work. Most of the risks are borne by the private sector because they're the ones that are buying the rights, and they're the ones that are saying, yes, we think there's sufficient demand in this area to justify the additional development, so they're bearing those risks. The access to development rights for the vulnerable groups still has to be protected by the government. Okay. We have two cases here. One is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And Sao Paulo was one of the first leaders to actually use public auctions to sell these additional development rights. Their objectives were to both meet the need for higher demand in some parts of the communities, and also to raise the revenue to improve the infrastructure in poor areas. They have had examples of both successful and less successful auctions of rights in Sao Paulo. The second case was Mumbai, India. Here they had a need to restrict the density and height to buildings to prevent overloading existing infrastructure. They also had a need to raise additional funds for infrastructure improvements and social housing. And they had density and height restrictions that increased land prices and reduced the amount of affordable housing. So they used the sale of additional development rights, which were then relocated to other parts of the city to meet these needs. And you can read about that in the cases as well. Enjoy your discussion.